What's up, everybody? This is the first video in a little series I'm calling Chess for Noobs. So if you're a beginner or a noob or looking to get better in chess, these videos are made for you to get better. In this video, we're going to be going over castling and king safety. I'm going to keep it super short. It's only going to be maybe 5 minutes long, and I'm sure you'll learn as much as you can in as little time as you can. So first, we're going to go over castling. Castling is when your king moves over 2 squares and your rook goes on the other side. Seems pretty simple, and you can even do it on both sides. But there are a couple of rules. Rule number one is that the space in between the king and the rook must be free. Like over here, black has all these pieces in between the king and the rook, so he cannot castle. Another rule is that the king can't have moved. If I put the king over here, I can no longer castle. That's just the rule. The pieces have to be in their original spot. This includes the rook. If the rook moves, I can't put it back later and then castle. The last rule is that you can never castle through a check or while you're in check. This goes with the theme that you can never put your king in danger. For example, I cannot castle on this side because the bishop is attacking the d1 square. If I move my king over 2 squares, I'm technically putting my king in danger when it's on d1. Now I can castle on the other side because it is free. Now that we've gone over the rules, it's important to know when you want to castle. In this position, white has castled and black hasn't. White has a pretty scary attack going against the black king, and that is because the king is still in the center. If black was to move the bishop and the knight out earlier in the game instead of making these silly pawn moves, then maybe he would have been castled and safe. It is always good to castle as early as you can. Now we have a new position on the board. Should white castle here? No, white should not castle here, because they actually have a really good move, which is knight takes f7. This attacks both the queen and the rook at the same time. Now in this position, would it be good for white to castle here? Yeah, it would be a perfect time to castle. The only difference is that white had a really good move before, and now the game is pretty steady. This is just to show that you should always castle, but there are a few exceptions if there's a very good move. Now that we know when we should castle, it's important to know why we castle. We castle to keep the king protected behind a set of pawns, and to put our rooks in the middle. Our opponent's king is in the middle, so he's in great danger. Our position is a lot better because rooks do better in the middle, especially when they're controlling part of a file. Now that we know how to castle, it's important to know how to keep the king safe. Let's say in this position, black moves their pawn over here. This is a very bad move, not just because I can take the pawn like this, but because it gets rid of the nice wall in front of the king. You want to keep this wall of pawns right in front of your king. Once you open up the wall, it makes it a lot easier to attack. Some exceptions to this rule are moving the pawn on the side like this. This isn't very bad because the wall still looks stable. It prevents the knight from going to this square, and the pawns are still connected. It would be a little different if you were to move the pawn 2 squares forward. Now the pawns aren't connected, and they're a little further from your king. Alright, now let's say it's black's move. What move can black make to open up the pawns in front of our king, or our wall? Black can open up our wall by taking the knight. If black takes the knight, we have to take back, and now our king is in great danger because this file is wide open. By now you know the basics of castling. Now all you need to learn how to defend the castled king. Notice how both kings here have the pawns right in front. Looks very nice. We got that wall that we're talking about. But black has this threat. The bishop and the queen are both aimed at our h2 pawn. Now this looks very dangerous. Let's say it's white's turn. What would you do to defend from this attack? If you said to move the g-pawn forward, you are correct. Now, I told you that it's a little better to move the pawn on the side, but that doesn't always work. You need to learn how to be flexible in chess because the rules don't always apply. Moving this pawn would still lead to a checkmate. Moving the g-pawn prevents the attack, and our wall is still pretty nice. Now, just to reflect on what you learned, you now know how to castle, you know that you need to castle early. Now you also know that castling is to keep your king protected behind a wall of pawns while having the rooks in the middle and connected to each other where they belong. Now it's time to try it out in a game. Let me know how you do in the comments, and let me know what videos to make in the future. Bye.